Many chainsaw accidents have been attributed to a poor or incomplete size-up of the overall cutting operation, including the tree to be felled, limbed, or bucked. Procedural size-ups ensure sawyers evaluate each cutting situation they encounter in an organized and consistent manner.
Hello, I'm Adam Benkula, Follower One Evaluator. Today I'll be walking you through a complete procedural size-up. While doing a size-up, it is important to consider all factors that can influence your decision making. The components of a procedural size-up are objective, hazards, liens, escape plan, cut plan, complexity analysis, and the go-no-go decision. Let's take a closer look at the hazard analysis. By utilizing the outside-in, top-down approach, you can be sure you're considering each factor.
For hazard analysis, the outside-in, top-down approach is a systematic procedure to assess the conditions of the entire work area before engaging in a cutting operation. Observe the big picture first, starting with a wide-angle lens. Then move in to observe the work area. Finally, narrow your focus to the cutting area. Take your time to look up, down, and all around for potential hazards.
Today's task is hazard tree removal within a popular rec area in an old burn scar from 3 years ago. Looking at the big picture factors, I'm going to do some self-evaluation first with the human factors. I'm prepared for the operation. I have all the right equipment. I'm mentally prepared and physically prepared. I'm hydrated, well-fed, and well-rested. Next factor I'm going to consider is going to be the weather. Today's biggest influencing factor is going to be the wind. We've got 5 to 10 mile-an-hour winds. That could become a hazard if the winds exceed the 15 mile-an-hour mark. We could see trees starting to fail on their own with those winds. So we'll set that trigger point and reevaluate as necessary. So the next factor I'm considering is going to be the terrain. In this specific site, it's relatively flat, so it's not going to be much of an issue. There are some areas where there's challenging terrain as far as footing, but I don't have to worry about my material rolling down the hill and impacting values at risk in the area. As far as values at risk, we do have trails and roads, and I do anticipate possibly seeing recreators in the area, and we'll take appropriate mitigations as that comes up. So navigating to the work area, I typically like to approach my cutting area from an uphill side if I can, so I can observe all the hazards associated with the specific work area. And that just also allows me to not have as many overhead hazards or rolling material type hazards above me. So as I've navigated into the work area, I found a spot where I can approach from the uphill side. I've got a great view of the overall stand. Multiple things stand out to me. I've got multiple leaners, some broken top trees, some trees that have burned and fallen over due to the fire, and trees that have multiple tops, which can be a point of failure. So these are all things that help paint the picture for me as I'm evaluating the safety of working in this area. So transitioning from my work area considerations into my cutting area considerations, this tree behind me with the pink flagging has been identified as a tree that needs to be removed. Before I start my size up on that tree, I'm going to take a few minutes and evaluate all the trees that are within proximity that could directly or indirectly impact me while I'm working in this area. After taking a few minutes to evaluate the trees in the stand here, I'm comfortable proceeding with the size up. There were no indications to me that any of these trees would imminently fail. The biggest consideration that I'm thinking about are the wind speeds today. Now that I've completed the big picture work area and cutting area hazard analysis, I've taken a close look at the tree and determined that the general lean is towards this stand of trees over here, but also leaning towards this natural opening out here. And so with that, I'm gonna have my objective be out here in this natural opening. I like to hang a piece of flagging for easy reference while gunning the tree. So now that I've determined an objective, I'm gonna move on to my hazard analysis, my lean analysis, developing my escape plan, and my cutting plan. At any point in time, if I gather information that doesn't support the initial objective, I'll need to reevaluate. So as I begin my hazard analysis on this tree, I'm taking into account that I evaluated the top of the tree while I was observing the work area and the cutting area and didn't make note of any observable hazards. However, we're going to take a closer look, starting at the top of the tree, working our way down. So as I work my way down, there are a few broken branches that are hung up, and the majority of the bole of the tree is devoid of bark. That's just an indication to me that the tree's been dead for a while and there's potential for rot within the tree. So as I work my way down to the ground, I'm evaluating the roots for obvious signs of rot or root bulge. Really not noting any of that. So really the biggest considerations for me as I move forward are the hung branches and the potential for rot in this tree. Once I've completed the hazard analysis and feel confident that I can safely proceed, I'll begin to determine the leans in relation to my objective. I'll utilize a plumb to determine head, back, and side lean and how they may influence my cutting plan. Based on my initial impression and the objective I've selected for this tree, I've now moved 90 degrees for my intended lay, and I'll be assessing how many feet of head or back lean are present. I'm aligning my plumb with the top of the tree and making note of where the plumb intersects the ground. Based on my plumbing, I've determined I have 3 foot of head lean, which supports my original objective. Now that I've determined the head lean, I've moved to the back of the tree to determine side lean. I've made note of where the plumb intersected the ground again and determined that there's 2 foot of side lean present. However, if I'm uncertain of the lean, I should plumb from all 4 quadrants. Do not proceed if you're not confident where the tree is leaning. Having your partner size up the tree as well can be helpful. We want to predict where the tree would fall if it were to fall on its own. This helps us determine the good side and the bad side of the tree. When determining the good side and the bad side of the tree, we want to take into consideration its natural lean and any overhead hazards that may be present. It's also important to consider the weight distribution. So in relation to this tree, the weight distribution is mostly influenced by its natural lean and limb loading. Now that I've completed my hazard and lean analysis, I'm going to develop my escape plan. Based on the lean and the hazards, I've determined that this side of the tree is the best side of the tree, so the good side of the tree. So this will be my primary escape path. It's important to have 2 escape paths when cutting. My secondary escape path is going to be out this direction. I like to walk out my escape path prior to executing my cut plan. This ensures I'm familiar with the route and there's no obstacles in the way. I also like to be able to look over my shoulder while utilizing my escape path to ensure that there are no broken branches or broken tops that are being flung back into the escape path. This way I can adjust accordingly. It's best practice to be able to get as far away from the stump as is safely possible. Now that I've completed my hazard and lean analysis and developed an escape plan, let's talk about the cut plan. For this tree, a conventional undercut is totally appropriate. The conventional cut consists of a gunning cut, roughly 1/4 to 1/3 the depth of the overall diameter of the tree, and a 45-degree sloping cut. When I initiate my gunning cut, I want to initiate it at a comfortable cutting height, typically about waist height. Talking about building our hinge, we don't want our hinge to exceed 1/10 of the overall diameter of the tree. So for this tree being roughly 20 inches, that's about 2 inches. However, with this tree being dead, the fibers are going to be more brittle and there's less weight in the tree. So 1 inch to 1.5 inches is appropriate for this tree. So moving to the back cut. A conventional back cut is what I'll be utilizing. And with my back cut, I'm establishing my stump shot height. I want my stump shot height to be roughly about the same metrics I used for my hinge width. So in this instance, it's going to be 1 inch to 1.5 inches. As I have room for a wedge, I'll place a wedge and initiate my cut moving forward. So now that we've got a cut plan and it's communicated to my saw partner, and he knows where I want him to be while I'm executing the cut plan, I want to give a warning shout. I'll do this before I initiate my undercut. It's best practice to take out an earplug when you do the warning shout and listen for a response. Again, I'll want to give a warning shout before initiating my back cut as well. The next step of the procedural size up is to determine the overall complexity. I've identified the objective, I performed the hazard and lean analysis, and I've developed an escape and a cut plan. Based on all these factors, I've determined this to be a low complexity cutting operation, which is within my skill set and qualification level. The final step is a go, no go decision. This is where I determine if I'm comfortable with proceeding with the operation. It can be beneficial to evaluate your overall plan and consider if I've missed anything, or are there any weaknesses in the plan. This can be a good gut check. Remember, you always have the option to turn down an assignment you're not comfortable with. Prior to executing my cut plan, I make a final assessment to ensure that I have all the necessary equipment on hand. I ensure my saw is in good working order, and during felling operations, I should always have a felling axe and an appropriate complement of wedges. Before I initiate my gunning cut, I like to stand exactly parallel to my intended lay. This helps give me some perspective on where the third or quarter or whatever depth of my undercut is going to be. When I initiate my undercut, again at waist height, you want your cuts to be nice and level. We also want to make sure our pitch is correct. We don't want to be sloping down into the tree or sloping up into the tree. We'll initiate that gunning cut, dog into our corner where we know we want our depth to be, and we'll pivot all the way around till our gunning sight here on the top of the saw lines up exactly with your objective. Now that we're lined up on our objective, we're going to initiate our sloping cut. Utilizing your gunning sight as you're making that sloping cut can be helpful to ensure that you don't overshoot that cut. If you're making a cut and your undercut piece, your pie hasn't fallen out yet, but your gunning sight's lined up with your target, you need to stop. Take a look around, and most often what will happen at that point in time is your wedge will be in there and it'll be lined up all the way here. You'll have a little bit that didn't line up here. You can just knock that piece out and you'll still have a nice clean hinge, and it hasn't changed your gunning target. Now that I know my cuts are lined up, I always like to make one last check with my gunning sight, since it is the cut all the rest of the cuts are going to hinge off of. Once I'm confident that I'm lined up, I'll initiate my back cut. Keep in mind that our back cut establishes a couple of things. It's going to establish our stump shot height and our hinge width. I want to be about 1 inch, 1.5 inches on this tree above the gunning cut. And again, that's going to be about the same for the hinge width. As soon as there's room to do so, I like to put a wedge in. We really only need to advance the cut to the point the tree commits to its intended lay. At that point, you'll move out your escape path.
Nice work, Adam. The tree fell right where you wanted it. Now we'll go through the stump analysis, and let's start with the undercut.
I was shooting for about 1/3 and ended up with exactly what I was looking for. I came up just a little bit short on my sloping cut, which left me a little bit to clean up here. Ultimately, it came out really nice, had a nice clean line across the tree. So I'm really happy with that undercut.
Yeah, you bet. How about the back cut?
Originally, I talked about utilizing a wedge when I got into my back cut here. As soon as I started my back cut, I got movement into the intended lay. So I made the determination I wasn't going to utilize a wedge and just cut up to my hinge wood, predetermined amount of hinge wood here. And cut's nice and level. Again, pretty happy with the way that back cut turned out.
Okay, and let's go with the hinge.
A little bit of room for improvement here. You know, I was shooting for about 1.5 inches of hinge wood on this tree, and I got that on this side, but I'm more like 1 inch on this side. So, you know, a little bit of room for improvement. I just need to be mindful of my gunning sights while I'm completing the back cut, and ended up with just about the right amount of stump shot, so 1 inch to 1.5 inches matching the hinge wood there.
Yeah, for sure. And nice level cuts. Good job.
Yeah, thank you. Using a procedural size up, I safely and efficiently completed my assignment for the day. This procedural approach ensures that I understood the objective and evaluated all the components of the cutting situation in an organized and consistent manner. To complete this process correctly takes time. With consistent practice and application, it will become a natural and intuitive part of your cutting operations.